So it's nice to see everybody during Pesach. We are, believe it or not, still in the Torah service. We just finished the Haftarah, and now the Torah service kind of throws in a few prayers. And you know, if you think about it, when this is really the peak of the service. And so it's an auspicious time to pray for blessings. We saw that before we took the Torah out of the ark with Brich Shmei, this kind of prayer that appears in the Zohar by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That was before the Torah service, when we're asking blessings kind of on ourselves and the people of Israel. And now we're gonna shift the nature of the blessings. And it seems that the tradition of offering these blessings after the Haftarah emerged perhaps during the Gaonic period. So we're talking the 8th, 9th century Babylonia. And the prayer we're going to look at is actually not in our Siddur, but you will find it in traditional Siddurim. I suppose we can have a debate about whether or not we should be saying it or not. But the text of the prayer itself should give us some indication of where and when it comes from. So in our Siddur, this would be in the Siddur for Shabbat and festivals on page 148. So in our Siddur, we have, it says at the top of the page, the following two passages are recited only on Shabbat. All right. So now we can put the Siddur down, because we're going to start with a prayer that is not in our Siddur. If you open up an Orthodox Siddur, you would find it there. So Yakum Porkan begins in not in Hebrew but in Aramaic. This prayer is Aramaic. So I'm going to go ahead and read the English of it, and we can see if we can get a sense of where and when it might have been composed. May salvation arise from heaven, grace, kindness, and compassion, long life, abundance, and help from heaven, healthy bodies, perfect light, progeny who live and endure and who never abandon or treat lightly the wisdom of Torah. May all these be granted to our masters and teachers, the holy fellowships in the land of Israel and in Babylonia, also to the heads of the academies and the Dayanei Dabava, and to their students and their students' students, and to all engaged in Torah. May the master of the universe bless them, extend their lives, make their days numerous, and lengthen their years. May they be saved from all distress and evil illness. May our master in heaven sustain them in all seasons and times. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So when was this written? Where was it written?
I would say Babylonia.
Right. It's Babylonia place, right? So, and what exists in Babylonia at this time? If we're going to date this to 8th or 9th century, Babylonia is really the major Jewish community in the world. It has now kind of taken its place as the community which is serves as the spokes community on behalf of Judaism with respect to the Islamic Caliphate, which at this time is probably occupying 90%, the lands where 90% of the world's Jews are living. And so they're centered in this area in Babylonia. And so the local Jewish community, which is quite substantial, is turned to represent the Jews of the empire, and that kind of authority gives them a lot of power. It's perhaps one of the reasons that the Babylonian Talmud becomes the dominant Talmud for the development of Judaism. But so what do we have in this particular prayer? In the beginning and the end of it, the black parts, we have, these are the detail, the specifics of the nature of the blessing that we're calling for. And who is it for? Who is to be the recipient of all these blessings?
The teachers, the students, yeah.
Right, all the religious, scholars and leaders, right? So we've got masters and teachers. That's Maranan V'Rabbanan, And then we have Chavurata Kadishata, the Chavura, the circle, really, this is like the Chavruta, right?
Mhm.
The circles, the Kadishata, the Kadosh, the holy circles, Di Va'arva Yisrael, that are in the land of Israel, V'di Bevavel, and that are in Babylonia, L'Reshe Chale, L'Reshe Galvata. Actually, this doesn't quite translate that. Reshe Chale to the heads of the Chale, so the gatherings, and L'Reshe Galvata. This is a reference to the Resh Galuta, literally the head of the exile. And in Babylonia at this time, there were essentially two leaders of the Jewish community. There was kind of the head of the religious leader, the head of the academies. The title that was given to that person was the Gaon, right, which literally means the genius, but that's why it's called the Gaonic period. But there was a political leader as well, right? So there was kind of a separation of church and state, you could say. And the political leader was known as the Resh Galuta, the leader of the exile, because Babylonia was in exile, right? So we see that Reshe Galvata, Ula Reshe Mitivata, the heads of the yeshiva, Ula Dayane Debava, and here the Dayane are the judges, and nobody really knows what Bava means. So
it's like a gate.
A gate, yeah, Bava is a gate, but who is it referring to? Who are these judges of the gate? We don't really know who it.
I think it's an idiom, probably.
Sorry?
I think maybe it's an idiom.
Yeah, well, yeah, it refers to some group.
Right.
Right? Maybe this was a group of kind of pious people who did something important, or were praying for the return from exile, something. But we're, in this prayer, we're calling down blessings upon them. L'chol talmidei, all of their students. L'chol talmidei, and all of the students of their students. L'chol manda skin beraita, and everybody who engages in Torah. So we've got basically the leaders of the community and the scholars that we're calling down blessings upon. Now, you will still find this blessing in traditional Siddurim. I'm not sure why it's stuck around, given that it's kind of anachronistic at this point to be praying for institutions that don't exist. But maybe symbolically, it's a way of calling down blessings for the scholars in the Jewish world, that they should continue their scholarship, continue teaching Torah, and continue to have students following in their footsteps.
Some of that
part of it
wording
sounds like Kaddish Drabanan.
Yes,
Well, it's in Aramaic.
Well, it's in Aramaic, and it's asking for the same thing.
Yeah, and Kaddish Drabanan is a Kaddish with an extra paragraph thrown in there, which is asking for blessings for the sages. Yeah. Now, it's not as specific though as talking specifically for the academies of Babylonia. It's not, but yeah. So we typically recite Kaddish Drabanan after completing study of rabbinic texts together, and so it's included in the service at certain points. All right, so we've got here's the first of two Yakum Porkans. So there's a second Yakum Porkan, and it is identical to the previous one, except the blue part in the middle is different. So may all these be granted to this holy congregation, old and young, to their children and their wives. So it's L'chol Kahala Kadisha Hadain, to the entire Kahala HaKadisha, so Kihila Kedusha, the holy congregation. Hadain means Hazeh, this holy congregation. Rav Revaya im Ze'eraya, so the Rav Revaya, the great ones, right? Yeah, a nice way of saying the elders, right? Im Ze'eraya, which is the little ones, the young ones. Tafla Unishaya, children and women, or children and wives, right? Malka da'alm, all right. And that's it. That's the part that's unique. So we have the exact same formula of blessing, only this one is for the holy congregation, and from the language of it, it seems to imply the men in this holy congregation, along with all of their families. So this prayer, this Yikum Purkan, is in our Siddur, word for word. And I was curious to see that it even in this egalitarian Siddur, it preserves Tafla Unashaya, their children and their wives, right? Which I found that a little bit surprising that it was not changed. Although if you notice in English, the translation here is "be granted to all members of this congregation." And that's it. We kind of left off parts of it, which is curious. To sate my curiosity, I went to check out Siddur Lev Shalem, which is the newest Siddur published in the conservative world. And I looked up the same prayer, and I found that the expression Tafla Unashaya was removed. Right? So otherwise it's identical. So it just says Rav Ravaya and Zeraya, old and young, and then it ends there. So I guess they corrected the inegalitarian nature of the of the prayer. But one of the things that's fascinating is that this is a really old prayer. I mean, this goes back to Gaonic times, and so we can see that from a pretty early stage, prayers for the scholars and for the congregation were being included in the Torah service before we put the Torah away as a particularly propitious time. Now, in our Siddur, what comes next? All right, we get Mi Sheberach Avotenu. So we get a Mi Sheberach. All right. So what does Mi Sheberach mean?
Who blessed?
Who blesses.
Who blessed, right? So Mi Sheberach is may the one who blessed. We'll kind of in English we'll throw a may in front of it. There we go. So this is from Machzor Vitri, which is from the 12th century. This is one of the earliest sources that we have, liturgical sources that we have. It's later than Siddur Rav Amram that we started with, but this is quite early. And this is the earliest version of the Mi Sheberach formula that we know about. Right? So nowadays there's lots of Mi Sheberachs, right? Familiar with the Debbie Friedman, Mi Sheberach, right? So that is based on the formula that appears in Machzor Vitri dating back to the 12th century. And so this is the earliest one that we have in print. Of course, then it was being handwritten. And this is not exactly what we have in our Siddur. But what I would, so if you've got this, we've got this Machzor Vitri, 12th century, it's being said in synagogue, calling down blessings. So this can give us some insight into what was going on in a synagogue, right? What was the function of a synagogue in the community? Well, what they're praying for in this prayer can give us some indication of what the values of the community are. So we start, may the one who blessed Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our ancestors, right? Avraham, Yitzchak, Yisrael, Avotenu, right? The Chasidim Arishonim, and the early Chasidim, the early pious ones. Vivarech kol kihilot hakodesh vet kol hakahal hazeh. May he bless all holy congregations and this congregation. Heim u'neshehem uvnehem uvnotehem v'chol asher lahem. Them and their wives and their sons and their daughters and all that is theirs. Mi shetiknu batei knesiot litfilah. All right, so that was the introduction. And now we're going to specify who these blessings are for. So those who established synagogues litfilah for prayer. All right, so now we see what the purpose of synagogues is. Umisha ba'im l'tocho lehitpalel, and those who come into it to pray. All right, so now if you just show up, you get a blessing. It's good. Umisha nodnin ner lamaor, and those who give ner lamaor. So ner, I'm not sure if it's just candle for light. I think it's light for the lightings, right? What they were using to burn, I'm not sure it would have been candles necessarily, because candles are relatively speaking quite expensive and difficult to make. So maybe this just refers to oil or whatever other fuel. But so those who provide light for the lightings, v'yayin l'kiddush b'havdalah, and wine for kiddush and havdalah, upat lo orchim, and bread for the guests, utzdaka l'aniyim, tzedakah for the poor, umi shemachnisin orchim betoch beitam, and those who bring in guests into their homes, v'chol otam she'oskim b'tzorchei tziburam hakadosha, and all of those who labor for the needs of their holy public, their holy congregation. Right? All right, so that's the people who we're calling down blessings for. Hakadosh yishalem schara, may the Holy One pay them their reward, v'yasir mehen kol machala, and remove from them all illness, v'yirpa kol gufatam, and heal all of their bodies, v'yishlach l'chol abonotam, and I guess like send away all of their sins, something like that. V'yivarech ovdei yedehon, and bless the works of their hands. B'chol zman v'idan v'nomar amen. At every time and occasion, and let us say amen. Okay, so this is pretty similar to what we have today in our Siddur. Romeo, I see you're putting in the chat window, there's no matriarchs. That is correct. There are no matriarchs in this early version of the Mishaberach.
I have a comment. Our Siddur says Veislach lekol avonam. Here's Veishlach.
Yeah, so I'm guessing it's a typo. I'm guessing Yishlach is a typo and that it should be Yislach, which would make more sense. Forgives all of their sins. So, but it's not my typo. It's a typo from the text that I copied it in from. So, so I should have corrected that. Okay, what's the purpose of a synagogue? What's going on in a synagogue in the 12th century?
Prayer and ritual, if they're lighting candles and doing kiddush and havdalah, but also public service.
Right. So what is the public service? What's
feeding guests, tzedakah, housing guests in their homes.
right?
Presumably people, it doesn't say the poor or the homeless, it's guests. So are people traveling?
Yeah. So one of the purposes of the synagogue was to house Jewish travelers. And so there would be benches along the walls of the synagogue that people would actually sleep in overnight, specifically over Shabbat. And so the community would provide meals for the travelers in the synagogue on Shabbat. And so this is, obviously people are contributing towards this. And so this prayer is calling for blessings for the people who are providing that for the community. And here it seems to suggest that sometimes people will actually bring those travelers home with them to stay in their homes. And they get extra blessings, right? Because they're I guess taking the pressure off of the synagogue to have to house people.
So they're working on Shabbat?
I don't know if they're working, they're having guests over. Yeah.
No, I mean before that, in the actual synagogue.
Well, no, I think the people would be bringing
and taking care of.
Yeah, so
just
this is a blessing on that. This blessing appears on Shabbat, but I think we're on Shabbat, on this special holy day at this auspicious time, we're asking God to bless the people who support the religious needs of the community.
See, so it's happening throughout the week.
I would think so, yeah.
Taking care of the travelers.
Yeah. So I mean, this is at a time in the Middle Ages when Jewish communities had to be pretty tight knit, but Jews did a lot of traveling. There were a lot of merchants that went from town to town, and they knew that they could rely upon the local Jewish communities to put them up, and whether it was to stay in the synagogue or to stay, perhaps get the hospitality of someone who will bring them into their home. That was one of the things that Jewish communities did for each other. Okay, now our Mishaberach is quite close to this, quite close. Not a whole lot of changes. But first, what I want to do is I want to back up and see what actually is in our Siddur. So in our Siddur, we took the second of the two Yikum Porkans, and we kept it word for word. No changes at all appear in it. And then for the Mishaberach, we had a couple of changes. We add Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah.
Yeah.
Right. We removed their wives. Right. In Kolkio, Haim uvnehem uvnotehem. Right. Is what
So we
we
removed it from the Mishberach, but not from Yikum Porkan. Alone.
Exactly.
How come we don't say their husbands instead of their wives and then their sons and daughters?
Well, so now what do we
I'm
have?
just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No. So now we've done Vivarech Kol HaKal. So may he bless all of this holy congregation with all other holy congregations, them, their sons and their daughters.
Yeah.
Right. So it's this is an egalitarian.
Well, I was just saying, paying homage to the women more just to make up for the past, say they're the women, their husbands.
Yeah, so I suppose you could say Haim unishehem v'hain I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, but I like the Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. And Leah.
Yeah, and that's consistent with I think most of the Mishaberach, but probably all the Mishaberachs that are in the Siddur, we've added the matriarchs to the formula.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And what else did we do is we got rid of the line about bringing people into their homes, right? We still say, those who give, lights for the lightings and wine for Kiddush and Havdalah and bread for the guests and tzedakah for the poor and everybody who's engaged in the needs of the community, be'emunah, faithfully. Okay. And then the rest of it is all the same.
Why they took the part from bringing guests to the home? I think it's very nice. And
it is very nice, but it was removed. That's not just a conservative move that to remove it. It's not in, I don't think it's in Orthodox Siddurim either. So, prayers, they evolve and they change. Why that was that removed deliberately or accidentally? I'm not sure.
Because it used to be a very nice minhag to invite the guest, to have, kiddush together, or even stay overnight. Yeah.
One of the things I like about the Debbie Friedman version, let's just say, is that your healing of the body and of the spirit, because sometimes that seems to me that you have someone in your mind that you're praying for, and maybe you're not praying that they're going to get better. You're actually hoping that they have an easy passage. But you're hoping that they come to that. But what you're hoping is that they approach that time with equanimity or with peace, that if they're facing their final breath. And so I like that, having it in there. Do you know what I mean?
So I think we looked at the Mishaberach L'Cholim a couple of times ago, but I think that's in the traditional language also. Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf. Right now, what was originally meant by Nefesh and Guf, I'm not exactly sure, because these prayers were composed at a time before modern medicine. So.
So this prayer isn't the Mishaberach.
This is not the Mishaberach L'Cholim.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
The Mishaberach formula, right? That's right. People often say, will think when they hear Mishaberach, they'll think, oh, it's the prayer for the sick. That's not what Mishaberach is, right? Mishaberach is a formula for asking God to bless, whichever group of people we want to bring attention to, right? So here, this is the first Mishaberach that we have. Right, and we can see that it's the purpose of the Mishaberach was to call upon God to bless the people who support the functioning of the community, the religious community that we're living in. So we still use that, but it's a great formula, right? And so we have used that formula and expanded it And so now we've got the Mishaberach L'cholim, right? Prayer for the sick. But also we've got a prayer every time somebody comes up for an aliyah, at Sinai, when we're, not trying to prevent our services from lasting 3 hours long, everybody who gets an aliyah gets a Mishaberach also. Right. And it's not a prayer for healings per se. It's just, this person just was called up to the Torah, had an honor. And so now we're giving this person a blessing.
Thank you.
And so even if you look in the Siddur, there's, you can see this on beginning on 143, we get, for those called to the Torah, we've got the version for a male, a version for a female, a plural version if you want to kind of give a group Mishaberach to lots of people who were honored. There's one for those about to be married, right? So at an Ufruf, there's a version. The next page we've got for a bar mitzvah, for a bat mitzvah. Then we get for one who is ill. There's one that's not in here, but for the parents of the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah. There's for the well-being of a mother after childbirth, for the parents of a newborn daughter, for the mother of a newborn daughter, for the parents of a newborn son, for the mother of a newborn, right? We go on. There's 3 pages of versions of Mishaberach that all occur during the Torah service. The other ones occur during the course of the Torah readings. This one comes after the Haftarah, right? So, but all those other ones are based on the formula established here. So, and of course, Debbie Friedman, she used the same formula as well, right? And then composed a dual language blessing, which is quite beautiful. But we can see in this one there is a reference to healing as well. V'yasir mehem kol machala v'yirpa lechol gufam, right? We'll remove from them all sickness and heal all of their bodies. Okay, so, and then we move on to the next one. So this is now at the bottom of 148. So what we have in our Siddur is a prayer for our country. And it is, this version of the prayer is new. Yeah, relatively new. So what we're going to look at is where this idea of praying for the country that one lives in, where it comes from. And so we're going to start with Jeremiah, who is the first one. So Jeremiah was a prophet who prophesied at the end of the First Temple era and during the destruction by the Babylonians of the temple, and in the first years of sending the Jewish people into exile. They were sent to Babylonia and they were sent down to Egypt in exile. And so this is what appears in the book of Jeremiah in chapter 29. So this is the text of the letter which the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the priests, the prophets, the rest of the elders of the exile community, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Right. So we're getting the text of the letter that Jeremiah sent to them. There's a few verses now that are kind of just throwing out some names. But here's his message. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. Right. So he's saying, get comfortable in Babylonia. Continue your lives, right? Have families. V'dirshu et shlom ha'ir asher higleti etchem shama, v'hitpalalu ba'ada el Adonai ki vishloma yiyeh lachem shalom. It says, seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper. The letter goes on. And he basically says that it's going to take 70 years, but then after 70 years, God is going to bring you back from your exile. But in the meantime, get comfortable and pray for the well-being of the city. Remarkable. We're talking about Babylonia, right? they're in Babylon. And he's saying, pray for the welfare of this nation that has just destroyed you and sent you into exile. Right? Pretty shocking, right? So
why does it look like Jeremiah exiled them and I have exiled you?
Well, because he's I mean, this is what prophets do. The prophet speaks, but they're speaking the word of God, right? So God's word is kind of being channeled through the prophet.
All right, but it doesn't say
You'll see a Ne'um Adonai, thus says the Lord, something to that effect.
All right.
Okay, so we see that in Jeremiah. Now, what did they do with this? You know, we have no idea, right? We don't have the text of whatever prayer they might have said, and we don't have it. And then when we return from exile, and then that return from exile last 600 years, you know, Jews have autonomy in their land. So we're running the temple. So we don't necessarily need to seek the welfare of the foreign kingdom. Although we do know that, you know, when the Persians send them back, you know, they send them back and say a prayer for me when you get there, right? So, you know, this idea of Jews as a community saying a prayer on behalf of more powerful leaders is something that goes way, way back.
And is it possible that also some of them stayed there, not all returned?
Oh, we know they did. Yeah. And in fact, when the Babylonians sent people off into exile, most likely it was, I mean, who does it say? Priests, prophets, the rest of the elders of the exile community, and all the people. So if you're Nebuchadnezzar and you want to really tamp down any possible uprisings, you're going to send the leaders, right? The people with power, the rich people, the people who are running the temple. Those are the people you're going to get out of there. The common people, probably less important to get rid of.
No,
and
I was thinking when they went back to Israel.
Yeah. So all these people.
Some remained in Babylon.
Remained in Babylon. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, certainly. Yeah. They definitely remain behind. And we know that they remained in Egypt as well. And actually in Egypt, there were flourishing communities. And even there were temples that were, a couple of temples that were built in Egypt. There was one in, I think, Alexandria, and then one in Elephantine.
When was this?
You know, the 5th century BCE, 4th century BCE. Yeah. And then, of course, there were Jews that stayed behind in the land of Israel as well. And there was trouble with them when the returnees from Babylon got back. Because the ones who went to Babylon, they saw themselves as being the real pious ones who had preserved everything, and those who'd stay behind had intermarried with all of the locals and had corrupted all of their ways. And so Nehemiah and Ezra tried to actually get them to divorce all their wives, but they failed. Surprise, surprise. And then, but then this issue of tension between those who returned from exile and those who didn't go into exile, that remains, and it extends into the era of the rabbis. And there are fights between people, and they start insulting each other by questioning their lineage, right? And saying that those who descended from people who did not go into exile have questionable lineage, and therefore they shouldn't be part of the community. And then eventually, I forget which rabbi it was, had to step in and say, you know what, if we start investigating everybody's lineage, we're going to find that none of us are kosher. So let's just stop. All right. So, now we'll jump ahead to the Mishnah. So this is in Pirkei Avot, which is a tractate of Mishnah, or probably familiar with lots of passages from Pirkei Avot. And it appears in the order of Mishnah that deals with nezikin, with damages, right? So these are when judges are going to have to sit and rule on cases between people or criminal cases, they need to have good, strong ethical foundation. And so that's where Mishnah Avot comes in. And it starts by establishing the chain of tradition, starting with Moses at Mount Sinai, passing it to Joshua and to the elders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, it gets to Shmaya and Avtalion. All right, so here we're talking 1st century BCE, during temple times. Shmaya and Avtalion were the two great scholars of the day. After Shmaya and Avtalion, the next generation was Hillel and Shammai, just to kind of put things into context. And then a few generations later, we get to the rabbis. So Shmaya Avtalion, Kiblu Mehem, so that's the people who came before them. They received it from them. Shmaya Omer, Ehov et hamalacha usnat harabanut ve'al titvada larashut. Right, so Shmaya says, love malacha, love work, snat the rabbanut, hate the rabbanut, right? And it's not the rabbanut in Israel today, although some might want to apply that. But rabbanut means those who are in authority, right? Those with power. Ve'al titvada larashut. I translated, do not make yourself known to the authorities. Titvada is like from lada'a, to know, but titvada is lahit parallel. So that's to make yourself known, larashut, to those with authority. So what exactly, well, what might this be talking about? Don't make, and think about it in context. Don't make yourself known to the authority.
Don't be conspicuous to the Romans.
Okay. Possibly, keep your head down. That's possible. Don't attract attention. Any other possibilities? Who's the kind of person who wants to make themselves known to the authorities?
A snitch?
Maybe a snitch.
Or obey the laws, don't do illegal things.
No, so this is, don't break the law. That's possible. In the context of the other teachings, he seems to be saying, just do your work and don't try and exert power over other people, right? That there's a problem when you start to, when one person is in a position of power relative to another person. And so I think what he might be talking about is, there are those who are going to ingratiate themselves with the authorities, right? Think, business people need legislation getting done to, favor their project. So they're going to get to know their politicians, right? And what I think he is saying here, and some of the commentators I think go in this direction as well, is that when you do that, you're putting yourself in a position of power, and that will invariably lead to corruption, or at least a stronger possibility of corruption. And also, people rise and they fall in their power as well. And if you become too tied to a particular authority, then you are going to suffer their fate as well. But however we want to read this, maybe it means keep a low profile also. That's possible as well. However we want to read it, there is there's a certain amount of wariness with regards to those who are in charge. There's something dangerous about it. Better to just keep your head low, do your work, and don't play the power games. And then in Mishnah Avot, next chapter, we see Havu Zehirin Barashut. This, I think, is Rabban Gamliel learning from Hillel Hazaken, I think. So he says, Heve Zehirin Barashut. Be careful with the ruling authorities. Why? She'ein mekarvin lo la'adam ela l'tzorach atzman. Because they do not befriend a person except for their own needs. Literally, mekarvin lo. They don't bring a person close. They don't bring a person close, right? Except for their own, greedy needs. Nir'in ke'ohavin b'shat hana'atan ve'ein omdim lo la'adam b'shat dachko. They seem like friends when it is in their own interest, but they do not stand by a man in the hour of his distress. All right, so they want you for your campaign donations, but as soon as you're driven out of business or you're wrapped up in scandal, they very quick to condemn you, right? Run away. All right, so again, we see the ambivalence or the wariness about the politicians, right? Best to stay away. And finally, Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim Omer, Heve mitpalel b'shloma shel malchut, shilmale mora'a ish re'ehu chayim bala'o. Rabbi Chanina, the vice high priest, the Sgan HaKohanim, this is the second in charge among the priesthood. He said the following: pray for the well-being of the government. And here it's malchut, this is actually the authority, like the kingdom, right? For were it not for the fear it inspires, if not for it, the fear of it, every man would swallow his neighbor alive.
You got the scoop on Hobbes by about 1600 years.
He did, yes. So now this is suggesting, maybe a different perspective with regards to the authorities, right? This is not that the authorities are so corrupt. This is that the authorities keep order, and without the authorities, we'd be living in chaos. So and this also appears in Mishnah Avot. So we hear both voices with regards to the authorities, and that rings true in terms of what governments are good for and perhaps not so good for. Now, so he's saying, pray for the well-being of the government. What he means by that, what kind of prayer, we don't know. We don't have his actual prayer. But it does seem that Jews were praying for their governments. This is from Abu Darham, who writes a very, very extended commentary and list of laws and descriptions on the liturgy. He's in Spain, the 14th century, so long time ago. And he's describing the service. He's describing the Torah service. And so right after we get the Haftarah, he says this: "Ve'achar kach mevarech et hamelech ve'et hakahal ve'omer ashrei u'machazir sefer Torah limkomo." And afterwards, the Haftarah, you say a blessing for the king and for the congregation, and you say Ashrei, and then return the Sefer Torah to its place, right? And that's essentially what we do, right? We go from Haftarah, we add the Yakum Porkans in at that point, so which are essentially prayers for the community, and then we do the prayer for the kingdom, right? Prayer for the government. And Abu Darham has it in the opposite order, but it's all in essentially the right part of the service. So it would seem to be that it was a widespread, well-known custom in Spain in the 14th century to be doing this. All right, now, in terms of what the prayers were, this is one of the earliest versions that we have of a prayer for the well-being of the country. This is a Sephardi Siddur published in Venice in 1622. So this is the faceplate. Inside it says Siddur Tfilot Kiminhag Sfaradim. So this is the Siddur of prayers. So the order of prayers according to the custom of the Sfaradim. Bilshon Ivri Ulishon Sfarad, in the Hebrew language and in Spanish. And then it says Nidpas Bivinitzia Shnat Shin Pei Bet. It was printed in Venice in the year was that 382, right? But not 382. It would be 5382, right? So, and then we get Orden in Ladino, Orden de Oraciones Segundo I'm not sure what how to pronounce that. Vio hebreo en lengua hebreica y en
Idioma,
español.
language.
Huh? Oh, yeah, we should have
Language.
Romeo. We should have you do it. El Vio.
This is
You
the
had a good
order of
accent
the.
there.
This is the order of the praise. This is the second book in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, and in Spanish. In Venice, 1622.
All right. There you go.
Yeah.
How about the bottom?
Aprello, I think that's Italian. No, Aprefo sounds Latin.
Yeah, it
Aprefo.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
All right. So,
That
all right.
one,
So we
yeah.
have this prayer book. And then here is here's a picture of the prayer itself as it appears. So this is from 1622. And there is a version from there's a Siddur from 1565. I didn't have time to include that one here, but it's the same prayer. So it seems that this one was probably copying that other Siddur. And so what do we have? We've got some instructions in Aramaic about what to do with it, but then we have the prayer begins Hanoten Shua Lamalachim Umemshala Lenesichim, right? The one who gives salvation to kings and governments and princes, something like that. So here is the language of the prayer itself. He that giveth salvation unto kings and dominion unto lords, he that delivered his servant David from the sword of the enemy, he that made a way in the sea and a path in the strong waters, bless and keep, preserve and rescue, exalt and magnify, and lift up higher and higher our Lord blank. Right? They left a blank space, right? Blank. So then you can fill in the name. And then Malchei HaMalachim, just to make sure you get the point, the King of Kings, right? Defend him in his mercy, making him joyful and free from all dangers and distress. The King of Kings, for his goodness' sake, raise up and exalt his planetary star and multiply his days over his kingdom. The King of Kings, for his mercy's sake, put into his heart and into the heart of his counselors and those that attended administer to him, that he may show mercy unto us and to all the people of Israel in his days and in our days. Let Judah be safe and Israel dwell securely, and let the Redeemer come to Israel. And so may it please God. Amen. All right. Now the version in 1565 is I think I read that it's they wrote in the name of Sultan Selim, who was Selim II of the Ottoman Empire, who had a good relationship with the Jews. This is soon after the expulsion from Spain, and the Ottoman Empire welcomed the Jews pretty warmly as being good for the empire. And so so it might be that this prayer was composed originally for Sultan Selim, and then it was expanded to be used for other rulers. What are the themes that we see here?
I like the concept of making him joyful.
Yeah.
Sounds so light in comparison to everything else being said.
It also
Planetary.
includes his counselors and attendants, so it's more than just the king, but it's other people in the government.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, believe kol yoatzav v'sarav. Yeah. Anything else jump out? Do you like the astrology in there?
Yeah, love it. He has his own planetary star.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot about, showing mercy unto us.
Right. There's the ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Is it ulterior?
No, but it's the please be nice to us and don't kill us motive.
Yeah, but we're also saying we're going to be your loyal servants, right? Yeah, be good to us, take care of us. We're calling for God to bless you. We want you to succeed. Right? And think about it, what Jeremiah said, which is, pray for the well-being. Let's back up. Oops, never mind. Seek the welfare of the city to which I've exiled you. Pray to the Lord in its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper. Right? So if the Ottoman Empire is thriving, then we're going to thrive also. Right? So I think they're pretty straight up. Of course, there also is the messianic ending as well, which is Valet Zion Goel, let a redeemer come to Zion. Kind of interesting that we throw that in there as well. But I suppose probably most of these kings would have wanted their version of the Mashiach to come also. All right, so a few decades later, Manasseh ben Israel sends a letter to Oliver Cromwell, 1655. And you can see to His Highness Oliver, Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and the dominions thereof, the humble petition of the Hebrews at present, humbly something I can't say, residing in the city of London, whose names are something or other. So what does he do? So Manasseh ben Israel sends a letter to Oliver Cromwell, and he includes this prayer, right? The same version of the prayer that we just saw. Now, who's living in England at this point in terms of Jews? Well, there are some Jews living in England illegally, right? So England had expelled the Jews some centuries earlier and never actually lifted the expulsion. So, but after especially after the expulsion from Spain, you had Jews moving up, eventually settling in Amsterdam, where life was pretty good, and then it's a short hop over the channel to get to England, and so you had communities growing there as well. If you want to read a fun book on this time period, I recommend A Conspiracy of Paper by David Liss. Historical fiction, and if you're interested in economic history as well, that's David Liss's background, and he just does a great job of weaving together kind of historical themes, the Jewish themes, and economic history. So he's dealing with the early stock market, and it's a good read. But it's exactly this time period. So you have a growing Jewish community in London, and they want to be recognized and kind of given legal status. And so Manasseh ben Israel sends a letter to Oliver Cromwell, who at this point I forget exactly, they've dethroned one of the kings. Here, if Hal's in reach, I'm sure he could tell us. They've dethroned one king, and then Oliver Cromwell, as a kind of big reformer, takes over for a while, but then eventually he gets beheaded and they return the monarchy. Don't remember all the details, but Oliver Cromwell was good for the Jews, and he changed the law and allowed Jews to stay in England. So here's what he says: an evident sign of the proper and natural resolution of this nation and their constant obedience to their princes. The same affection is confirmed by the inviolable custom of all the Jews, wheresoever they live. For on every Sabbath or festival day, they everywhere are used to pray for the safety of all kings, princes, and commonwealths under whose jurisdiction they live, of what protection soever, unto which duty they are bound by the prophets and the Talmudists, from the law, as by Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7, seek the peace of the city unto which I have made you wander, and pray for her unto the Lord, for in her peace you shall enjoy peace. He speaks of Babylon, where the Jews at that time were captives. From the Talmud, and he quotes, "Pray for the peace of the kingdom, for unless there were fear of the kingdom, men would swallow one the other alive," right? That's what we saw from Pirkei Avot. From the continual and never broken custom of the Jews, wheresoever they are, on the Sabbath day or other solemn feasts, at which time all the Jews from all places come together to the synagogue after the benediction of the holy law, before the minister of the synagogue blesseth the people of the Jews. With a loud voice, he blesseth the prince of the country under whom they live, that all the Jews may hear it and say Amen. And then he quotes the prayer, right? The same prayer that appeared in the Siddur. So then he goes on. So in any event, we've got this. I think they really believed it, right? This was something that was really important. I guess starting in this time period, Jews are getting more and more status in the societies in which they're living in certain places, and so this moment when Oliver Cromwell kind of allows Jews to have legal status in England, this was a really important turning point for the fate of Jews in Europe, and kind of a precursor to the emancipation that would follow. So we would refer to this prayer as Tfilah L'Shlom HaMedina, so prayer for the well-being of the nation, of the country. And so in our Siddur, we have a different version. I would suggest maybe a more American, something that more reflects American values and ideals. I don't have it up on screen, but we're probably pretty familiar with this prayer. Talk about, we make it a more universal prayer, right? Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony to banish hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country, right? So we don't see this kind of language in the older prayers. The older prayers are much more concerned with Jews as a particular minority community. We want to make sure that the government is going to, we're going to be loyal to you, and please take care of us, and be nice to us. America, we have a different. I don't think we see ourselves in the same way. I think we see America as a place where we have the freedom, along with every other group, to gather together and to exercise our religion. And so we recognize that those freedoms are founded on that being a universal right that all peoples have. And so the prayer itself becomes a more universal type of prayer. So, and notice we don't quote Jeremiah, we quote Isaiah at the end of the prayer. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. So we still have something of a messianic vision. It's not as explicit as the version that we saw earlier from the Spanish Siddur. Any questions or comments?
I have a comment. It's kind of political, but some people have looked at their recent rise in anti-Semitism. The questions of divided loyalty keep coming up, and so it seems like a trope that has just been there forever. And perhaps I was thinking on the letter to Cromwell that I don't know, like which comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing. But are we seeking to say to the ruler, "Don't worry about us. We're loyal to you. Yeah, we're Jews and we have our own thing, but really we want you to prosper. We want to be good citizens. That's who we are." So that I'm thinking about that, and in terms of where we are today, that we say, listen, yeah, well, we like Israel, and yeah, we consider ourselves a Jewish community, but we are Americans. We are Americans first, or which comes first, Jewish American or American Jewish, and all of those questions. That's what I'm thinking of reading these things, and it doesn't seem that the modern versions are addressing that at all. We're thinking that it's all in the past tense, And now we can just pray that we have a continuation of democracy, democratic principles.
Yeah, I mean, the one that we use now is really divorced from that entire history of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not saying, I'm not making any things about going back one way or the other, but wouldn't you like to be able to point to something and say, no, look at, this is what we say every week.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Is our current prayer, is it naive? Should we be going back to the other,
I mean.
the other one? I mean. Yeah, that's the question. What do we mean
How
when
about
we
a
say
new
Am
one?
Yisrael?
Yeah.
Right.
Big question.
Yeah. Sherry, what were you saying?
No, I'm just thinking, instead of going back to something, why not create something new? We've gone through so much change in such a short time. It seems like there would be a lot of good text that could be created by the rabbis of the conservative movement that would be more relevant to all of us today.
Yeah. And there are, I mean, there are lots of other versions that are out there. I know some synagogues will maybe to conserve time in the Torah. So what we do to conserve time at Sinai is we have a kind of a rotation between saying a prayer for a country, prayer for Israel, and prayer for peace, just as a way to shorten things. I know some synagogues have kind of created a prayer that consolidates all three themes into one prayer.
Mm-hmm.
If you look in our Machzor, we have a different version of these of a prayer for the country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at Lev Shalem and see what it does with it. What does let's see, Mike? Do you have a Mishkan available?
Yes. It's interesting. They've got prayers for the community and for the congregation, for the country, and for Israel. And as best I can tell, except for the one for Israel, there's no Hebrew. And there are a choice of two for the country, and it looks like choice of two for Israel. In practice, we rarely say these.
Any of them, really?
Wow. Is that in the name of time or because they aren't relevant according to?
Mostly time. This is in the lay-led services, and we tend to drag things out more than we should. So lots of things get dropped.
Okay, so I'm seeing here that the so in the 1920s, Professor Louis Ginsburg composed a prayers for the country, which is probably the one that appears in Sim Shalom. And you know, the other one, it talks about the king, right? So that language just doesn't work. And by the way, there are versions of the traditional one that mention the czar, right, for those Jews who are living in Russia, and not ironically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking here, and the version of the prayer for the country in Lev Shalem is different. They've made changes from the one that's in Sim Shalom.
Is it better?
Is it better? The ending part.
It's a subject that really invites invention.
I don't like the one in Sim Shalom.
You do or do not?
I do not.
How come?
It sounds stilted. It doesn't, it sounds like, first of all, it needs to go more into depth, and it needs to give, it shouldn't be, of course, you know, banish hatred and bigotry, you know, common bond and true harmony. I mean, those are all really nice things, but it doesn't speak to me. It just doesn't resonate with me. I feel like it could be rewritten. I'll rewrite it. And it could be a lot more poignant. I just think it's so necessary today and now, our relationship with our country. You know, this is so critical for where we are as Jews, as people, and just the things that are pulling us apart. And I just think it could be a little richer.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so I'm just kind of scanning the one in Lev Shalem, and it's different, but it doesn't seem to be different in a significant way, although they do offer a alternative prayer for our country. So we've got two different versions of it. But so we can see that the idea of praying for the country is somewhat dynamic.
Yeah.
And probably needs to be, as Jews are living in different situations at different times, right? Praying for the personal well-being of the king doesn't make sense in a democracy, right? So the other one it really emphasizes the personal relationship between the king and the Jewish community, as opposed to the version that we knew now, which is more about the institutions of democracy and us as a people who participate in those institutions of democracy.
Yeah. What do you think of the prayer in Lev Shalom? I mean, in Sim Shalom for the state of Israel?
Oh, so that prayer, we'll look at that prayer next week, but that prayer was composed by Rav Herzog and I think Chaim Nachman Bialik.
Oh.
And right, like I think in like 48, right at the beginning, they knew they needed one. And so they kind of composed the official one. So, and what we have in our Siddur is actually only half of it.
Yeah.
It's only the first paragraph of the two paragraphs. So I don't think that that's going to change given how it was composed.
Yeah, my favorite of all of them is a prayer for peace.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to me greater than any of the others that are written here in Sim Shalom.
Yeah. All right, well,
Sorry.
Sherry, maybe you have a task ahead of you.
I don't think the other rabbis of the conservative movement will approve.
I don't know.